It's 12 o'clock. That crept up fairly quickly, didn't it? It is lovely to see you all. Welcome to today's Think About Thursday. Thursday's crept up on us quickly as well. The weeks are flying by. Those of you who live in Sydney, or actually anywhere up and down the east coast of Australia, I guess, I hope you're staying safe. I hope you're coping with all the rain that we have been having. And fingers crossed, hey, that it starts to ease up soon and we get some sunshine, because it's a bit tiresome, isn't it? Tiresome for those of us who are lucky enough not to be flooded in, and obviously a lot more than tiresome for those of us who are experiencing floods. So for those of you out there stuck in floodwaters, in being cut off, having issues with being inundated, obviously thoughts and prayers and hopes for improvement sending your way. Today we're talking about insulin resistance. I have a feeling I've spoken about this before, but it's a common topic that requires, a regular check-in. So what is insulin resistance? Insulin resistance is when you have chronically high levels of insulin. Now, insulin is a hormone that we release when our body has blood sugar levels, when our body has glucose circulating through our blood, which happens when we eat. Generally, we eat carbohydrates, they break down into glucose molecules, and those glucose molecules go circulating around through our blood, and our cells take them up for energy. So that's one of our key sources of energy. Now, the way that the cells actually take them up is that insulin gets released, and it's almost like a little key. It pops around to your cells, and it tells them there's some glucose there that needs to be, that you can take, that you need for your energy. So it sort of unlocks the cells, and the cells take up the glucose. Now, insulin resistance happens when you have chronically high levels of insulin circulating around your body. And you can get chronically high levels of insulin when you have constantly high blood sugar levels. And what happens is, over time, those cells in your body start to resist the insulin. So they get a bit bored. The insulin knocks on their door, so to speak, and they say, "No, we're busy. We don't have time to fit you in. We're not taking any notice of you." What that means is the glucose keeps circulating, which means the body keeps pumping out more insulin to try and get rid of the glucose. And so more and more insulin is circulating. And over time, if it's untreated, if insulin resistance is untreated, over time that can lead to type 2 diabetes mellitus. Now, insulin is essential, obviously, because it helps our cells, helps us to use glucose for energy, and it also promotes muscle growth. It's pretty important. It's a very important hormone. But when our cells aren't responding properly and we develop this insulin resistance potentially, what can happen is we get increased levels of inflammation going on in our body. We get potentially abdominal weight gain. If you are menopausal or perimenopausal, your hot flushes might be worse thanks to insulin circulating. You might get fibroids, which can lead to painful or heavier bleeding if you are still cycling. You might start to have some cycles where you're not actually ovulating, but you still have you still bleed, and sometimes those bleeds can be heavier because ovulation creates progesterone, and progesterone can thin the uterine lining. And the other thing that can happen with excess insulin circulating around is you can also get a thickened uterine lining, which means that your periods are heavier as well. So insulin resistance can really contribute to perimenopausal, menopausal symptoms, and it is something that we need to pay attention to and to address. Now, the main sign of insulin resistance, typically it is abdominal weight gain. So it's when you get that sort of the apple shape around your belly, around your middle or your upper body. But having said that, you can actually still be insulin resistant without that sort of weight gain as well. And other signs of insulin resistance are things like always feeling tired, sugar cravings. If you get a blood test and you come back with high triglycerides, which are your fats, and high cholesterol, for example, and you can't work out why, it could be connected to insulin resistance. Now, how do you know whether or not you've got high circulating levels of insulin? There is a blood test, a fasting insulin blood test that you can do, your GPs can order. And if you're not sure, or if you think it might be an issue, it's definitely worth doing. They can do that as part of the standard raft of blood tests that we should all be getting every year these days anyway. It's not a glucose test, so they will measure your glucose or your blood sugars, and they do that regularly as well. But those tests generally only give you a bit of a snapshot in time, and they're not going to tell you what your insulin's doing, and you want to know what your insulin is doing. So a fasting insulin test. The other test that the GPs can order is a glucose tolerance test, and if you've been pregnant, you may remember doing that particular test where you go and you're fasting and you drink that sickly glucose drink and then wait for, I don't know, an hour. I can't remember now. You sit and wait for an hour or 2 hours or whatever the amount of time is, and then they take blood before and then they take blood again afterwards. So they see how you've responded to a high glucose drink, and that's called a glucose tolerance test. So that combined with what's your fasting insulin level gives you a good picture as to whether or not you have concerns about insulin. Now, why is it an issue during perimenopause and menopause? It is because, of course, as is so many things during perimenopause and menopause, it's those fluctuating hormones that have an impact. Estrogen, for example, has insulin sensitizing effects. So estrogen will help our insulin to work more effectively. So once it starts to fluctuate and then once it starts to decline, the insulin is not working as effectively. We also, during menopause in particular, our testosterone levels start to rise a bit, and that can play a role in worsening insulin sensitivity or insulin resistance, as well. So hormones playing around with what's going on with our insulin can have an impact during perimenopause and menopause, and that is something that we need to be on top of. Now, traditional treatment, I'm just going to have a sip of water, excuse me. Traditional treatment for insulin resistance, because it's generally associated, as I mentioned, with that abdominal weight gain. Traditional treatment is, right, you just need to lose weight and you'll be fine. But what the research is now showing and the evidence is showing is it's actually the insulin resistance is contributing significantly to the weight gain, not the other way around. So if you start cutting calories, for example, in an attempt to lose weight, but you don't address the high levels of insulin that might be circulating, then you won't be able to lose weight. So you need to work on your insulin resistance first before you start focusing on your calories. And what I really like to talk about with my clients is not cutting calories. I'm not a fan of calorie counting unless it works for you, and some people love it, and that's fine. But I am much more interested in helping my clients to get to know, how am I feeling when I'm eating? I want them to eat to feel good. Now, all right, so the question that you will want to know is, all right, that's all well and good. Say I'm insulin resistant. What do I do about it? How do I fix it? If weight loss or just cutting calories isn't going to fix it, what is? And that is a very good question. There's a few things you can do. Number one is movement, and I talk about this a lot. You guys know that. Movement improves the uptake of glucose from your bloodstream into your cells, particularly while you're exercising. Movement improves that. Movement helps to build muscle, and muscle helps to improve insulin sensitivity. So the more you can move around during the day, the more exercise you can fit into your day. And in particular, and again I say this a lot, the more strength work you can build in, the more muscle you will build, the more you will improve your insulin sensitivity. And strength work can be as simple as body weight stuff like lunges, like squats, like push-ups, like planks, like using resistance bands, whatever works. Now, confession, this morning I got up and I put my exercise gear on thinking I'm going to find time in my day. I've got a really busy day. There's a lot going on. I don't have time to get to the gym this morning. I can't really go out for a run because the weather's so rubbish. but I'm going to find time. I just need 10 minutes here and 10 minutes there to do some exercise. So I had my exercise gear on ready to go, and I didn't do it. Actually, no, that's not true. I've done a tiny bit just before I jumped in here. I did maybe 10 minutes work, but I had, my intentions were good. My intentions were to do a lot more. And I say this regularly to my clients. Where can you fit in some extra time? Your exercise doesn't necessarily have to be all at once. It doesn't need to be a full 40 minutes in one go, particularly strength-based stuff. If you can find 10 minutes here and 10 minutes there, and you might do 10 minutes on your legs and then maybe 10 minutes on your upper body during the day, maybe you can do that 3 times. There's half an hour's worth of exercise. But it requires effort. It does require effort. So, movement. Movement is super important to help with insulin resistance. Next thing is protein. You need protein. Protein at a minimum, most likely, for most people, at a minimum 20 grams of protein during or with your main meals, right? And so what constitutes 20 grams of protein? There's a few ways you can find that out. You can just plug it into Google. What am I eating for lunch? And this is a good way to do it, actually. Make a note of what you're eating for a few days in a row and just check the protein content just by doing a little research. And so that can be, what's 20 grams of protein? If you had 2 eggs for breakfast with, say, a third of a cup of crumbled feta on top, you're close to 20 grams of protein for that breakfast. But I would hazard a guess that a lot of us don't get enough protein at breakfast, depending what you're eating. And similarly at lunchtime, if you have a sandwich at lunchtime, you've probably got a nice serve of carbs in there if you're having a sandwich, obviously, and you might put some salad on it. But how much protein are you putting with it? If you've just got a couple of pieces of ham, yes, that's got some protein, but it probably doesn't have enough. So it's really worth paying attention to how much protein you are eating with each meal and not just saving it all up for the end of the day. Protein will help you feel full for longer, and that will help with reducing that insulin resistance as well. Cut down on your concentrated sugar intake. If you are a fruit juice drinker, that is concentrated sugar, and concentrated sugar will impact your insulin levels. Sweetened yogurt, flavored yogurts, low-fat yogurts have usually got lots of sugar added, frustratingly. So avoid them. Go for a natural yogurt, a Greek yogurt with some fruit in it if you need some flavor. But just reduce that incidence of the concentrated sugar, because concentrated sugar in the form of juice, for example, releases glucose straight into your bloodstream very quickly, and that instant sugar rush, for want of a better word, causes the insulin to come rushing out to help get rid of it, and that contributes further to insulin resistance. So, and dried fruit. Dried fruit's a tricky one. Is it tricky? Dried fruit is deceptive, I guess. It's easy, for example, if you like dried apricots. I love dried apricots, but you can't have too many. So the best way to do it, if you're eating dried fruit, if you're having that as part of your day, is simply just pull out apricots, for example, pull out 3 from the packet and then put it back away, so you don't mindlessly eat. Because thinking about it, if you are eating a dried apricot, if you are eating a normal apricot, maybe it's that big, right? And you'd probably have 1. You're unlikely to have 2 or 3 at once. So you've got to just be mindful with dried fruit. How much of it are you having? Because that also is higher in sugars. Now, the other thing you can do, and this is interesting, but the other thing that really helps people with insulin resistance is actually intermittent fasting. And what that involves is cycling between fasting for longer periods of time and eating, obviously. But intermittent fasting for women in particular seems to work quite often. Not for everybody. Anything that I recommend is not necessarily for everyone, because we're all different, right? But intermittent fasting has been found to help women in particular with a lot of abdominal weight gain, to help them reduce some of that. And one of the best ways, there's a few different ways you can do it. I'm sure you've all heard of it. There's the 5-2 diet, there's the 16-8 diet. But one of the things that seems to work well for women in particular is a restricted window of eating, say an 8-hour window. And what that means is you eat dinner early by 6 o'clock, ideally, and then don't eat again until 10 o'clock the next morning. And what you're doing is you're actually training the cells in your body, the energy source within those cells, to use different forms of energy, not just to rely on glucose. And what this creates is what's known as metabolic flexibility for weight loss. So it's working, your body is working out different ways to use different forms of energy, and at the same time, because you're not having constant sort of blood sugar spikes up and down, because you're having a nice long period of time between meals, that helps to reduce that insulin resistance. Now, I don't recommend that people start doing, if you're going to try something like this, an 8-hour window, couple of things to be aware of. I would suggest starting just doing it a couple of times a week, not consecutive days. If you find you are super hungry in the morning, so say you're going to eat normally breakfast at around 10 a.m, but you find you're really, really hungry, or you're having sugar cravings, or you are just binging on a snack, then two things. Firstly, you're probably not having enough protein. And secondly, you can bring your eating, your breakfast earlier. So maybe start with a smaller, like instead of what was it? It was a 6 till midnight, till 10 o'clock, 16-hour fast. Make it a 12-hour fast instead. Just play around with it a little bit and see what works for you. And the other tip that I have is if you are exercising in the morning, I'm also not a fan of exercising in a fasted state, because that puts extra stress on your body. So if you're going to try intermittent, shortened window eating scenario, don't do it on the days when you're exercising in the morning, and just try it a couple of days a week and see how it goes for you. Don't be afraid of hunger, especially at night time. So say you have dinner at 6 o'clock. You've then got a lovely amount of time for your food to be digested before you go to bed. Have a cup of tea by all means, that's perfectly fine, preferably a herbal tea. But you might start to get a little bit hungry, I don't know, maybe around 9, 10 o'clock. That's okay, you can still go to bed, you'll be fine. Go to bed, go to sleep, wake up, have your breakfast by 9 or 10 o'clock, ideally 10 o'clock, and just start to pay attention to what's going on for you. Pay attention to how you're feeling when you eat. Oh, and one more point that's really important. While you are eating during that 8-hour window, your meals, they're not meant to be calorie restricted. They are meant to focus on eating to satiety. So eating to how you feel. Making sure that you are full, not overly full, not uncomfortably full, but comfortably full, so that your food keeps you going until the next meal. And the key to doing that is getting enough protein in there. Okay, so what do I need to summarize? How best to improve insulin resistance if you have insulin resistance? Movement, always a key. Protein, making sure you're getting plenty of it in your day. And consider trying a form of intermittent fasting, maybe 2 days a week, where you have a restricted window of eating. Restricted eating window, you know what I mean. As always, if you would like any more information, please get in touch. Otherwise, if you're watching on replay, throw in a hashtag replay. Any questions, let me know. Oh, and I promised I would announce the winner of the competition that we did for, I think it was just the last week in February, to bring in some new people into the group, because the more people we have in this sort of group, the better. We can all help and support each other. And the winner of the free mini consult with me is the lovely Leslie Keith. Congratulations. So I'll be in touch. We'll work out a time for that. In the meantime, I will let you all get back to your Thursday. Stay safe, stay dry, and go forth and enjoy the rest of the weekend. Go forth in hormonal harmony. All right, till next week. Take care. Bye.